News chief Washington correspondent Kevin Cirilli. Emily, let's start with what we are learning today, and that is the movement, potentially, if you want to call it movement, on the definition of what might be separating both Mexico and the United States, which we heard from Mick Mulvaney today on Meet the Press, and then there's also that which came from the Democrats over the last 24 hours in terms of the piecemeal legislation they're trying to push out there. Is this enough for us to get past go?
Well, what we're seeing is that Democrats are acting like they are in power because they are, and they're acting like they know how to govern because they do. Democrats are moving forward with trying to keep the government open, trying to pass the budgets, trying to move piece by piece to isolate the actual problem, which is the border wall. Trump is fixated on it. Look, I think it's interesting that Mulvaney is coming forward saying you can change the definition as if that's a piece to move on. I actually don't think we'll hear the same thing from Trump because we hear across the board from everyone within the White House, he does not understand the detail, does not get into them, and now we're hearing the wall actually started as basically a mnemonic device for him. So with his lack of understanding of policy, even when Republican strategists who actually care about strict immigration don't actually even want the wall. So it really is isolating it just as a campaign promise. And Democrats are coming in saying, look, we're going to isolate you in talking about just your campaign promise. We're going to govern. We're going to keep the government open. We're going to keep the IRS open. So Democrats are coming forward. So, it may end up being the debate that Trump always wanted, I guess, which is wall or nothing.
And very quickly here, what they are saying, at least the White House, is, well, where is Congress? Why hasn't the Speaker kept members of Congress there in D.C. to work on this? You've heard it before. He's saying, I'm here in the White House. I'm waiting.
This shows a real lack of understanding of the way that governing actually happens in Washington. The president should not be having the first conversation. There should be constant back channeling. There should be constant conversations. From everything we've heard, when Pence tries to reach out, it's a dud. And there's very little happening from the legislative office to begin with.
We were looking at the numbers, and that was the question. That's what Jeff brought up, is what is the real pain? And one of the viewers did tweet out today, for instance, well, this is very difficult for a person like myself. He says he's a GS-11, which is anywhere from, I believe, around $60,000 to $80,000 Rich gets here, who says most of my fellow federal employees live like most folks, paycheck to paycheck. Google OPM 2019 pay scale, the bulk of people are less than GS-11. What we do have those numbers from OPM, and the actual amount of loss that typical, on average, federal employees are going through right now. And that number ranges from $3,000 to $4,000. But this could go on even longer. So, I want to ask you here, as we look at what Republicans can do, Ryan, Representative Costello, is this being felt by the right as well as the left at the moment? Because we were talking about members of Congress. Do they understand that? And does the White House really understand what the real pain is here?
I think everybody understands what the real pain is. The problem is that the president is dug in. And here's what's going to happen this week. The Democrats are going to put standalone appropriations bills on the floor, and Republicans are going to get squeezed by the White House to fall in line and vote against those standalone bills. And that IRS bill in particular is going to be an extremely difficult vote for the following reason. Many low and middle income families are ready to file their tax return at the end of January, early February, so they get that refund by the middle of February. If those IRS workers are still furloughed or not working, those tax refunds are going to be delayed. And so you're going to see one day after the next standalone individual appropriations bills where there's real life consequences for a lot of Americans, and it's going to be an up or down vote. And this is not a good place to be. This was very, very predictable. And you can point fingers all sorts of different ways, but what I think is going to happen, Richard, is that this shutdown is going to continue for at least another couple weeks, and that the president probably is going to pull the emergency declaration from his pocket and take this to court. I see that one coming. That's going to be wildly controversial, but if I were a betting man, that's the bet I'd place.
Yeah, Kevin, put this all together for us, both of these two moves up from the left and the right here. What do you think is going to happen
Well, look, I think that former Congressman Costello really is hitting the nail on the head, because the president in the Rose Garden on Friday said to us reporters, as well as to really the national global media, that he strongly views the ability for him to get his wall through mechanisms outside of congressional approval as an option for him. And to Emily's point, look, these back channels where you have the vice president as well as acting chief of staff Mick Mulvaney and Jared Kushner trying to negotiate with Democrats, according to my reporting from Democratic staffers up on Capitol Hill, Richard, they don't want to be negotiating with the vice president because they're not sure that the vice president can actually strike a deal. We've seen time and time again where the president ultimately just arrives at whatever conclusion he wants, regardless of what his staffers or the vice president says.
I want to play a little sound from those federal employees who have been affected, and then I'll get your reaction.
If you're putting a new beer into the market, you need to get that label approved by the Tax and Trade Bureau. Right now, they're not processing any of those labels.
If you lose your income, if you lose your employment, you still have those life obligations that you have to meet, and you still have to come up with a plan to meet those.
The majority of our clients want to have their day in court, and so this does nothing more than just delay what could be an important hearing for them.
Get rid of politics and think about the people that voted you in. So think of them before you think of yourself.
Kevin, so those are the real people, right? The real folks, the 800,000 people out there. And I've been watching very carefully the timeline for their paychecks. Not only Rich Getz, who was expressing very specific examples for himself, but this, January 8th, if agreement is not reached, and according to Mick Mulvaney on Meet the Press today, that is the deadline at midnight if they want to go through with the paycheck on January 11th. That's this coming Friday. Otherwise, that payday is missed. And then the next payday is January 25th. That's the next available paid period. And, you and I are, well, maybe you are a rocket scientist, but I'm certainly not. You don't need to be one, but that's a month without getting paid here. Kevin?
And these are just the folks that we can actually calculate. I mean, for folks outside of Washington, or even if impacted by government having offices in other parts of the country, but this is a company town. Republicans or Democrats contributing to the political economy in the DMV, or the greater Washington, D.C. area. So restaurants are impacted by this. Small businesses, government contractors are impacted by this. Everything in the first quarter of this month is impacted by this. And to put it in perspective, it would be like if Apple suddenly had 800,000 workers out at their headquarters that were suddenly not able to go to work. That whole ecosystem and the ecosystem of the economy around it is getting a punch to the gut because of this.
That's gargantuan, Representative
And I'd like to add to that.
And add to that, please, Representative. And I want to add just one piece of data. Over 30% of those who work for the federal government are veterans.
Sure. So I'd like to add this to it. Working for the government is a noble thing. Somewhere along the line, government became a bad thing, but those government workers are performing a service, whether it's in science, medical innovation, VA. You can go right on down the line. So not only are those government workers not receiving a paycheck, but in some instances, work either isn't getting done or vendors may not be getting paid. And so there is a collateral detrimental impact on the economy and on helping those Americans who rely on the federal government. This is a very unfortunate situation. I really hope it gets rectified. I'm very pessimistic that it gets rectified anytime soon, because as we saw a little while ago, the notion that getting rid of a concrete wall and having some sort of different wall is viewed as a concession by the administration. Well, if the political party you're negotiating with doesn't view it as a concession, which the Democratic Party doesn't, means that the administration and House Democrats are still wildly far apart in terms of having a meeting of the minds.
Emily?
Yeah, look, when you hear those stories, it really is just heartbreaking of the federal workers and those who are all impacted around them. And it really does, to the congressman's point, it puts every Republican member of Congress in a position to say, is this really the hill I'm willing to go down to stay on the side of the president? Look, he's not even trying to make a deal. The path he's starting to go down, power that is likely illegal and will be stopped in court. So if you're willing to keep holding his water to go down this path, you couldn't make this deal when Republicans were in power themselves. So now you have to say, look, am I going to stand on the side of the actual workers and isolate just the wall? Am I willing to keep the government moving and keep the economy moving? And Republicans are going to start to question themselves. You start to see a couple in the Senate start to break off and say, look, we got to get this done. And I think we'll see, very small, but I think we'll start to see more in the House as they start to feel those pressure from their constituents.
All right, great conversation. Thank you so very quickly, sir.
Yeah, so this is not about House Republicans anymore. There were House Republicans in December that voted for it with the wall. Now it's about House Democrats. It's about House Democrats and Senate Republicans. It's about the administration and House Democrats. House Republicans really don't have much involvement in this anymore.
All right, we will see. Former Congressman Ryan Costello, thank you so much. Emily Tisch Sussman, thank you as well. Kevin Cirilli. Sorry, man, you got to stick with us. Thank you, all three.
I'm happy to stick around.
All right, fantastic, sir. Coming up, wall versus fence, concrete versus steel. Yeah, it's that evolution of President